Otithi, The Runaway by Rabindranath Tagore. Moti Babu, Jomindar of Katalia, was on his way home by boat. There had been the usual forenoon halt alongside a village mart on the river, and the cooking of the midday meal was in progress. A Brahman boy came up to the boat and asked, "Which way are you going, sir?" He could not have been older than 15 or 16. "To Katalia," Motibabu replied. "Could you give me a lift to Nondigram on your way?" Motibabu agreed and asked the young fellow his name. "My name is Tara," said the boy. With his fair complexion, his great big eyes, and his delicate, finely cut, smiling lips, the lad was strangely handsome. All he had on was a dhoti, somewhat the oars for wear, and his bare upper body displayed no superfluity either of clothing or flesh. Its rounded proportions looked like some sculptor's masterpiece. "My son," said Moti Babu affectionately, "have your bath and come on board. You will dine with me." "Wait a minute, sir," said Tara, with which he jumped on the servant's boat moored behind and set to work to assist in the cooking. Motibabu's servant was an up-country man, and it was evident that his ideas of preparing fish for the pot were raw. Tara relieved him of his task and neatly got through it with complete success. He then made up one or two vegetable dishes with a skill which showed a good deal of practice. His work finished, Tara, after a plunge in the river, took out a fresh dhoti from his bundle, clad himself in spotless white, and with a little wooden comb smoothed back his flowing locks from his forehead into a cluster behind his neck. Then, with his sacred thread sparkling over his breast, he presented himself before his host. Moti Babu took him into the cabin where his wife Annapurna and their 9-year-old daughter were sitting. The good lady was immensely taken with the comely young fellow. Her whole heart went out to him. Where could he be coming from? Whose child could he be? Ah, poor thing! How could his mother bear to be separated from him? Thought she to herself. Dinner was duly served, and a seat placed for Tara by Motibabu's side. The boy seemed to have but a poor appetite. Annapurna put it down to bashfulness and repeatedly pressed him to try this and that, but he would not allow himself to be persuaded. He had clearly a will of his own, but he showed it quite simply and naturally without any appearance of wilfulness. When they had all finished, Annapurna made Tara sit by her side and questioned him about himself. She was not successful in gathering much of a connected story, but this at least was clear that he had run away from home at the early age of 10 or 11. "Have you no mother?" asked Annapurna. "Yes." "Does she not love you?" This last question seemed to strike the boy as highly absurd. He laughed as he replied, "Why should she not?" "Why did you leave her then?" pursued the mystified lady. "She has 4 more boys and 3 girls." Annapurna was shocked. "What a thing to say!" she cried. Can one bear to cut off a finger because there are four more? Tara's history was as brief as his years were few, but for all that, the boy was quite out of the common. He was the fourth son of his parents and had lost his father in his infancy. In spite of this large family of children, Tara had always been the favorite. He was petted alike by his mother, his brothers and sisters, and the neighbors. Even the schoolmaster usually spared him the rod, and when he did not, the punishment was felt by all the class. So there was no reason for him to leave his home. But curiously enough, though, the scamp of the village, whose time was divided between tasting of the fruits stolen from the neighbors' trees and the more plentiful fruits of his stealing pressed on him by the same neighbors, remained within the village bounds, clinging to his scolding mother. The pet of the village ran away to join a band of wandering players. There was a hue and cry, and a rescue party hunted him out and brought him back. His distracted mother strained him to her breast and deluged him with her tears. A stern sense of duty forced his elders to make an heroic effort to administer a mild corrective, but overcome by the reaction, they lavished their regretful fondness on him worse than ever. The neighbors' wives redoubled their attentions in the hope of reconciling him to his home life, but all bonds, even those of affection, were annoying to the boy. The star under which he was born must have commanded him homeless. When Tara saw boats from foreign parts being towed along the river, or a Sonyashi in his wanderings through unknown lands, resting under one of the village trees, or a gypsy camp sprung up on the field by the river, the gypsies scented by their mat wallet hut, splitting bamboos and waving baskets, his spirit longed for the freedom of the mysterious outside world. Unhampered by ties of affection, after he had repeated his runaway 2 or 3 times, his relations and neighbors gave up all hope of him. When the proprietor of the band of players which he had joined began to love Tara as a son, and he became the favorite of the whole party, big and small alike. When he found that even the people of the houses at which their performances were given, chiefly the women, would send for him to mark their special appreciation, he gave them all the slip, and his companions could find no trace of him. Tara was as impatient of bondage as a young deer, and as able to music. It was the songs in the theatrical performances which had drawn him away from his home ties. Their tunes would make corresponding waves course through his veins, and his whole being swayed to their rhythm. Even when he was quite a child, the solemn way in which he would sit out a musical performance, gravely nodding to mark the time, used to make it difficult for the grown ups to restrain their laughter. Not only music, but the patter of the heavily July rain on the trees in full foliage, the roll of the thunder, the moaning of the wind through the thickets, as of some infant giant straight from its mother, would make him beside himself. The distant cry of the kites flying high in the blazing midday sky, the croaking of the frogs on a rainy evening, the howling of the jackals at dead of night, all this moved him to his depths. This passion for music next led him to take up with a company of ballet singers. The master took great pains in teaching him to sing the recite ballad composed in alliterative verse and jingling rhythm, based on stories from the epics, and became as fond of him as if he were a pet singing bird. But after he had learned several pieces, one fine morning it was found that the bird had flown. In this part of the country, during June and July, a succession of fairs are held turn by turn in the different villages, and bands of players and singers and dancing girls together with group of traders of every kind journey in boats along the big and little rivers from fair to fair. Since the year before, a novelty in the shape of a party of acrobats had joined the throng. Tara, after leaving the ballet singers, had been traveling with a trader, helping him to sell his pan. His curiosity being awakened, he threw in his lot with the acrobats. He had taught himself to play on the flute, and it was his sole function to play jigs in the Lucknow style, while the acrobats were doing their feast. It was from his troupe that he had last run away. Tara had heard that the Jomindar of Nondigram was getting up some amateur theatricals on a grand scale. He promptly tied up his belongings into a bundle with the intention of going there when he came across Moti Babu. Tara's imaginative nature had saved him from acquiring the manners of any of the different companies with whom he had associated. His mind had always remained aloof and free. He had seen and heard many ugly things, but there was no vacancy within him for these to be stored away. Like other bonds, habits also failed to hold him. Swan like, he swam lightly over the muddy waters of the world, and no matter how often his curiosity forced him to dive into the mire beneath, his feathers remained calm and white. That is why the face of the runaway shone with an unspoiled youthfulness which made even the middle-aged, worldly Moti Babu accept and welcome him, unquestioning and undoubting. After dinner was over, the boat was cast off, and Annapurna, with an affectionate interest, went on asking all about Tara's relatives and his home life. The boy made the shortest possible replies and at last sought refuge in flight to the deck. The vast river outside, swollen by the seasonal rains to the last minute of its brink, seemed to embarrass Mother Nature herself by its lively recklessness. The sun, shining out of a break in the clouds, touched as though with a magic wand the rows of half submerged reeds at the water's edge, the fresh juicy green of the sugarcane patches higher up on the bank, and the purple haze of the woodlands on the further shore against the distant horizon. Everything was gleaming and thrilling and quickening and speaking with life. Tara mounted the upper deck and stretched himself under the shade of the spreading sail. One after another, sloping grassy meadows, flooded jute fields, deep green waves of almond rice, narrow paths winding up to the village from the riverside. Villages nesting amid their dense groves came into sight and passed away. This great world with its wide gazing sky, with all the stirred and whispered in its fields, the noise in its water, the restless rustle in its trees, the vast remoteness of its space above and below, was on terms of the closest intimacy with the boy, and yet it never for a moment tried to bind his restless spirit within a jealousy exacting embrace. Calves were bounced by the riverside, hopped village ponies limped along, gazing on the meadowlands. Kingfishers rest on the bamboo poles put up for spreading the nest, took a sudden plunge every now and then after fish. Boys were playing pranks in the river. Village maids up to their breasts in the water chattered and laughed as they rubbed their cloths. Fishwives with their buckets and bargained with the fishermen over their catch. These everyday scenes never seemed to exhaust their novelty for Tara. His eyes could never extinguish their thirst. Then Tara started to talk with the boatmen. He jumped up and took turns with them at the poles whenever the boat hugged the shore too closely. And when the steersman felt he would like a smoke, Tara relieved him at the steering gear and seemed to know exactly how to work the sail with the changing direction of the breeze and the boat. A little before evening, Annapurna sent for Tara inside and asked him, "What do you usually have for supper?" "Whatever I get," was the reply, "and some days I don't get anything at all." Annapurna was not a little disappointed at this lack of response. She felt she would like to feed and clothe and care for this homeless waif till he was made thoroughly happy, but somehow she could not find out what would please him. When a little later the boat was moored for the night, she bustled about and sent out servants into the village to get milk and sweetmeats and whatever other appetizer were to be had. But Tara contented himself with a very sparing supper and refused the milk altogether. Even Moti Babu, a man of few words, tried to press the milk on him, but he simply said, "I don't care for it." Thus passed 2 or 3 days of their life on the river. Tara, of his own accord and with great enthusiasm, helped in the marketing and the cooking and lent a hand with the boatman in whatever had to be done. Anything worth seeing never missed his keen glance. His eyes, his limbs, his mind were always on the alert, like nature herself. He was in constant activity, yet aloof and undistracted. Every individual has his own fixed standpoint, but Tara was just a joyous ripple on the rushing current of things across the infinite blue. Nothing bound him to past or future. His was simply to flow onward. From the various professionals with whom he had associated, he had picked up many entertaining accomplishments. Free from all travelling, his mind had a wonderful receptivity. He had by heart any number of ballads and songs and long passages out of the dramas. One day, as was his custom, Moti Babu was giving a reading from the Ramayana to his wife and daughter. He was about to come to the story of Kush and Love, the brave sons of Ram, when Tara could contain his excitement no longer. Stepping down from the deck into the cabin, he exclaimed, "Put away the book, sir. Let me sing you the story." He then began to recite Dasaratha's versions of the story in a flawless flute-like voice, showering and scattering its wonderful rhymes and alliterations all over. The atmosphere became charged with a wealth of laughter and tears. The boatmen hung round the cabin doors to listen, and even the occupants of passing boats strained their ears to get snatches of the floating melody. When it came to an end, a sigh went forth from all the listeners. Alas, that it should have finished so soon! Annapurna, with her eyes brimming over, longed to take Tara into her lap and fold him to her bosom. Motibabu thought that if only he could persuade the lad to stay on with them, he would cease to feel the want of a son. Only the little Charu, their daughter, felt as if she would burst and jealously and annoyed. Charu was the only child of her parents, the sole claimant to their love. There was no end to her whims and caprices. She had ideas of her own as to dress and toilet, but these were liable to constant fluctuations. So, whenever she was invited out, her mother was on tenter hooks till the last moment, lest she should get something impossible into her head. If once she did not fancy the way her hair had been done, no amount of taking it down and doing it up again would be any good. The matter was sure to end in a fit of silence. It was the same with the most other things. When, however, she was in a good humor, she was reasonableness itself. She would then kiss and embrace her mother with a lavish affection and distract her with incessant prattle and laughter. In a word, this little mite of a girl was an impossible mystery. With all the fierceness of her untamed heart, Charu began to hate Tara. She took tearfully pushing away her platter at dinner. The cooking was done so badly. She slapped her maid, finding fault with her for no rhyme or reason. In fine, she succeeded in making her parents thoroughly uncomfortable. The more interesting she, with the others, found Tara's varied accomplishments to be. The angrier she became, since her mind refused to admit Tara's merits. How should she not be wild when they became too stubborn? When Tara first sang the story of Kush and love, Annapurna had hoped that the music, which could have charmed the beast of the forest, might serve to soften the temper of her wayward daughter. She asked her, "And how did you like it, Charu?" A vigorous shaking of the head was all the reply she got, which translated into words must have meant, "I did not like it, and I never will like it, so there." Divining that it was a pure case of jealousy, the mother gave up showing any attention to Tara in her daughter's presence. But when, after her early supper, Charu had gone off to bed and Motibabu was sitting out on deck with Tara, Annapurna took her seat near the cabin door and asked Tara to give them a song. As the melody flooded the evening sky, seeming to cheer into a hush the villages reposing under the dusk, and filling Annapurna's tender heart with a delight of unutterable love and beauty, Charu left her bed and came up sobbing, "What a noise you are all making, mother! I cannot get a wink of sleep." How could she bear the idea of being sent off to bed alone, and all of them hanging round Tara, rejoicing in his singing? Tara, for his part, found the tantrums of the little girl, with the bright black eyes, highly diverting. He tried his best to win her over by telling her stories, singing songs to her, playing on the flute for her, but with no success. Only when he plunged into the river for his daily swim, with his dhoti lifted short above his knees and tightened round his waist, his fair limbs cleaving the water with skilful ease, like some water nymph at play, her curious gaze could not help being attracted. She would be looking forward every morning to his birth time, but without letting anyone guess her fascination. And when the time came, this little untaught actress would fall to practice her knitting by the cabin window with a world of attention. Only now and again her eyes would be raised to throw a casual, seemingly contemptuous glance at Tara's performance. They had long passed by Nondigram, but of this Tara had taken no notice. The big boat swept onward with a leisurely movement, sometimes under sail, sometimes towed along, through river, tributary, and branch. The days of its immense wore on like these streams with a lazy flow of exciting hours of mind variedness. No one was in any kind of hurry. They all took plenty of time over their daily bath and food, and even before it grew quite dark, the boats would be moored near the landing place of some village of sufficient size against a woodland background, lively with the sparkle of fireflies and the chirping of cicadas. In this way, it took them over 10 days to get to Cathalia.